And that also works with the patterning that I mentioned before. So as I've said previously in this little video, I've removed much of the patterning, but another approach would have been to just completely ignore the fact that there's any patterning, ignore the fact that there's more than one colour on this steer, and just treat it simply as a brown steer. That's it, and just do that. And, with the benefit of hindsight, that might have saved me a little bit of effort here. But nevertheless, I'm, pressing on here with my flat brush and continuing with these more gestural marks. So I've kind of taken it, back a step, going back to the looser mark making that I prefer to make, and just adding some highlights again to the head of the steer. So next up, coming back in with some more bluey shadows, just to kind of help that rear leg recede a little bit. So that's worked reasonably well, I feel. That's kind of pushed that rear leg back to the far side of the torso. And I'm just adding I've just added a couple of touches there to the torso and the undersides of the horns. So sorry about the focus problem. That'll come back in just a second. There we go. And again, but I think what I will do with this particular painting is we'll make the background much darker eventually, because the orange in the colour of this animal that I've used, it's not really coming out quite as much as I would like. So we'll go with a darker blue background, and that'll help that orange really pop a lot more. But before we do that, I've just added some really dark areas to the eyes. So this is a mix of ultramarine blue and a touch of burnt umber. But that left-hand nostril, you can see I've still managed to paint that a little bit too low. So that'll need to be corrected in a bit. Now I wanted to sort of just change the colour scheme of that main shadow just a little bit, because it was very much just blue. So I've just gone for more of a purple colour there, so there's a little bit more. I think I actually added cadmium red to my palette there. So one of the advantages of having just the magenta and the yellow, as I mentioned earlier, is that it forces you to kind of mix up a variety of reds. However, that said, sometimes that can become a little bit tiresome. So if I am getting a bit tired of doing that, then I'll just add a bit of cadmium red to the palette, and that kind of gives you a shortcut to a certain range of purples. But again, it just depends, what you're looking to do and how you like to work. It's, I don't have any really fixed rules for any of the work I do. I want to stay a little bit flexible in my approach, and I don't want anything I do, any of the art I create, to become too laboured. And I feel that if I make any rule too strict, for example, let's stick with only these 3 primaries, then, I'm kind of limiting myself in a way I don't want to. I definitely like that limitation as a starting point for a painting or a drawing or whatever. And I might say, okay, I'm only going to use 2 colours. Yeah, that's a really good starting point. It's really nice to restrict yourself and limit your options. Forces you to make interesting decisions. But then later on in the process, when the thing has started to take a bit of a life of its own, and you're looking at it as something that you want to bring to completion, then it's a case of, okay, well, maybe I will have a 3rd colour. Maybe I'll break that rule that I imposed on myself at the beginning. But what I've been doing while I was chatting away there is I'm just cleaning up the outline of that rear leg. So with a very pale blue. And these little touches, these little adjustments to the outlines at this stage, they can really help you realise how close to completion you are with a particular piece of work. Something which is looking, just not quite right, and you can't work out why. If you just go back around and clean up some of the outlines and the edges, some of the line work which has perhaps gone a little bit astray, the minor adjustments, they really do make a difference. When I used to paint a lot of portraits, quite often I would wonder, well, why is this likeness not quite working? And then I'd go around and perhaps shave, just by using a bit of extra background, take off maybe a millimetre or two from the outline of the head where the hair was a bit too big on one side, and all of a sudden the person would come to life in the painting. So it doesn't take very much of an adjustment, especially with living things, with animals and people, to go from being something which is really very cool to look at and has really captured the essence of the being to, oh, that doesn't quite work. And certainly if you're looking to depict the expression of a person, a fraction of a millimetre in the way the eyes are positioned or the direction they're looking, that can really change things dramatically. So a little bit of a zoom in, and I just need to fill in a little. There's a little sort of bit missing from the steer's head there, so I've just filled that in. So this is kind of almost just a pale bright orange I've got here, and I quite like the way that's adding a bit of warmth to the highlights. So I'm still using a flat brush. This one is slightly narrower than the 1/2 inch I was using before. So just taking a moment to, sorry about the little bits of inactivity on screen there, but that's basically me just sort of stepping back just for a few seconds and thinking, what do I need to do next? And I like that sort of salmony orange, pale orange so much that I decided to continue that along the top of the head and over the top of the right eye as well. And that's really starting to add, that's working really well, I feel, against the orangey browns. But we definitely need to go darker with this background at some point, because the very pale, almost white background I've got below the mouth and along the left-hand foreleg of the steer, it's not really working very well for me there. And also the horns don't seem particularly bright and shiny. And I think that would be greatly improved with a darker background. So we'll come back and do that in just a bit. But still continuing with this little brush, just adding some of that pale orange on top. So that's helping again so we've gradually, incrementally been working towards this feeling of warmth and sunshine. A little bit of cross hatching there I just did. So a little bit of dry brush going across the dark and the light areas of the upper right hand front leg. And that's another way of kind of softening the boundary between light and dark. You don't have to just do blending. You could use a drawing technique within your painting. And that's something that I really enjoy doing, actually. So bringing a little bit of the dry brush gives you a way of drawing and painting within one brush stroke. So coming back to this nose, which is, I've lost count now of how many times I've tried to get these nostrils right, but I'm just doing a little bit of corrective surgery here. And that didn't quite work. Went a bit astray with the larger brush, so just lifted that off with a piece of paper towel. But the problem I've got here, and I don't know why I wasn't quicker to see it really, but part of it, I think, is sometimes when I'm filming, because I tend to, the way I work is I've got the camera obviously head on to onto the painting, so I tend to be standing off to one side, and that perhaps distorts my perspective a little bit. But no excuses. I should have got it right. But for some reason that I didn't spot that nostril was as low as it is until quite a way on in the painting. And now what I'm doing is I'm having a bit of fun really, because I've got that little band of blue curving round the lower part of the right hand horn, and I like this pale yellowy orange I've got so much, and I thought it would contrast well against that blue. So I just popped a couple of patches in on the right hand horn, and I just added a little highlight to the very tip of the left horn, and I've just done the same on the right, just off screen there. And my hope is when I put a much deeper blue in the background, the colours in those horns are going to come to life a bit more. So back to my small round brush, and back to the nose here. Now what I've spotted at this point is the outline of the nose isn't quite right, so I'm just bringing that out to the left a little bit more. And for the most part, the left side of the nose is kind of obscured with a bluey shadow, so I'm adding some of that as well, and just tidying up the line of the mouth, because, you know, it's the same with people and animals. The expression that we have to make the expression convincing, we have to work on the corners of the eyes, generally speaking, and the corners of the mouths. Obviously there are other things as well, like, you know, furrows in the brow and, you know, flared nostrils and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, corners of the eyes and, you know, corners of the mouth, that's what helps, you know, give us an expression. So I'm coming in now and adding a few more highlights to the nose. So I really, really do need to darken this background a bit. But we will get to that. So what I did then, as you saw, is I just sprayed that area with some water, and that's allowing me to, you know, just gives this interactive acrylic enough fluidity that I can go in with my little brush and just produce some really soft highlighted areas. So when you're working with conventional acrylic, it's fantastic at putting down very clearly defined patches of colour with hard edges. But if you want to just sort of soften those a little bit, it does work with normal acrylic fairly well, but you know, you're still on a bit of a time crunch. With the interactive acrylic, you can paint into a wet surface just very lightly and get these lovely subdued highlights. So, you know, it's a really wonderful advantage of these paints.